Welcome to the Nonprofit SideKick podcast. Changing the world is hard work, and nonprofit leaders are wearing all the hats while herding all of the cats, and it can get really lonely. You could use a sidekick.
We think of ourselves as your partners in mastering the unique balancing act of nonprofit leadership. Our goal is to provide insights, coaching, and direction for nonprofit leaders, both the heart and soul of nonprofit leadership and the nuts and bolts of nonprofit management. We're your hosts, Wendy Bertner
And Stephanie Masters.
Welcome back. Last time we introduced the concept of the unique balancing act that is nonprofit leadership. And today we're going to dive a little bit into the double bottom line, how we have to balance that every day, and the number of customers, the many different customers. And these two things are very closely related. So on the nuts and bolts side of it, we have to manage a double bottom line. We need to be looking at the finances every day. We need to be projecting out what's happening. When are we going to run out of money? How much money do we have? How are we going to do this? Really having a really good sense of the finances of the organization. And that has to be balanced with meeting or attempting to meet our mission. How are we accomplishing our mission? Nonprofits out of the gate, right? We have to have that mission. We have to have that public benefit in order to get the tax exempt status. So that is requirement that we continue to fulfill that. And our actions and our programs and our services are all related to that mission. And so balancing that, you want to make sure that you have enough money coming in the door to do the mission, to do the good work that you're trying to do. And you want to make sure that the good work that you're trying to do is having an impact. It's not just kind of surface stuff. Businesses don't have this requirement unless they choose to. Businesses can choose to have a bottom line. They can certainly choose to do good work in the community. But they don't have to. It's not a requirement. From day one, nonprofits are required to do this. It's a balancing act that we have to do every day. And that's the nuts and bolts side of it.
On the heart and soul side, we can talk about finances every day. Not that I like to. That's your area. But when you talk about the mission, it really comes down to, do people understand the why?
Yeah.
So, when people are counting the paper clips, as you like to tell some of our clients, it's not about counting the paper clips. It's about why the paper clips are important to how we do our work. What are we focusing on? How are we creating that prioritization in our work? So if people don't understand the why or the purpose behind it, they're not going to buy into, oh, I have to conserve, or this is the amount of money that I have to spend on this program or this event, or, investing in this next thing. Is that if people within the organization, especially the staff, have that centered mission and the why, talking about the bottom line makes it a little bit easier.
Right. And they also have to have the knowledge of the finances. I've worked with a lot of nonprofits where, in fact, one of my very early roles as an executive director, the first few months I was going crazy because the staff was coming to me. Can I buy this? Can I do this? Just little, this is where the paper clips example came from. Yeah. They were like, can I buy paper clips? And I'm like, do we need them? Yeah. Okay, then buy them. What I figured out, or what I discovered shortly thereafter, was that they had never been even shown a budget. They didn't know what was happening, how much we said we were going to spend on paper clips. They wouldn't have known if we were in budget or out of budget. So the leader before me had the staff really focused on the why. They were very focused on the mission, but they had no idea about the money. And so it was harder on me initially because I was the only one that was attempting to this balancing act of money and mission. And so I started to have regular meetings and then teaching them about the budget and the finances. And then we worked it into our staff meetings so that we talked a lot about what we were doing and how we were changing the world and making it a better place. But we also talked about how much money we had to do that and what the plans were for that money. And that's where the balancing piece comes in, is making sure everybody kind of knows this. And it just lays on our shoulders as leaders to make sure that we're doing this.
And it takes practice, right? You can't go into those meetings and think like, I'm going to have this perfect balance between telling them what we need to focus on the budget and then how does it impact their day-to-day work.
Right.
So it's, how did you do that? What lessons did you learn in trying to find the balance between what they needed to know and how it influenced the way that they led in the organization?
Yeah. And the irony of this, I will answer your question, is that I had the opposite problem with the board. The board was all focused on the money and didn't talk much about the mission, right?
Shocking.
Right. So yeah, it's practice, it's repetition because the staff had been there way longer than me. I was the new ED coming in. They weren't used to this. They weren't used to having to think about the money and how that impacted them. So part of what I did is I kind of changed the way I managed just a tad, and just they would still come to me and be like, hey, can we do this? Can we do this? And I'd say, well, let's look at the budget together. And not in a patronizing way. I realize my tone right there might have sounded a little patronizing, but I would say, let's look at it. Can we do it? What do you think? If we do this, we might not be able to do this. And so I would start to include them in the discussions, not just the decisions. So I know a lot of times when people first move into a leadership role, people come at you with question, and you want to make decision because you're the leader. But sometimes being a good leader means stepping back and helping them make good decisions. And that helps your balancing act too.
I also want to point out that it creates a level of transparency within the organization that allows people to understand more of, okay, if there are some constraints, here's why. And then how can we either navigate it or try something else. And you and I both love the book, The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle.
Yep.
And a lot of what you just talked about in managing the double bottom line is also the first part of his book, which is, developing trust.
Yep.
So if you create this transparency and you look at how you're communicating and what you're communicating, what we're doing is we're creating this collaborative environment, because it wasn't you just telling them, here's what the statements are, here's what you're going to do. It was more of you're encouraging and empowering them, as we've talked about in another episode, is and what that does is it creates buy-in and engagement. That it doesn't matter where you work within the organization, that you understand the balance between, okay, here's how we run the organization, and then this is the impact.
And so many people are afraid of that. And, I had board members kind of, what are you doing? Like, why are you including staff? Staff don't need to be included in this. And then I started also including the board on some other things, right? So this was not a perfect situation by any means. This is just one way that I think I did a good job. But it really is providing that transparency, but you have to be ready for, because I was not ready for the pushback that we shouldn't be that transparent with the numbers. Meanwhile, our 990s are public information. So the numbers are out there in different forms. But there's just, again, I think this is another thing that we are taught in our society to kind of not really talk about finances. And I think a lot of businesses, they hold their finances really close, whereas in the nonprofit sector, we just can't. Some of the details you want to, but in general, your finances are out there in the world. There's no reason to be too closed off about them and too secretive about them. So you have to get over that hurdle.
You and I have worked with several new EDs. And one of the things that I've seen from the heart and soul side is that new leaders want to come in and immediately establish themselves as the leader.
Oh, yeah.
And when they do that, they tend to come in with a really limited understanding of the organization. And what they do is they make assumptions, or maybe they do a little bit of research, but most of the time they want to come in and say, I'm the leader, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to change it. And you and I have seen that this is not successful.
No.
And so we've had 2 new EDs just within the last few months that we made the recommendation from the heart and soul side, and sort of the balance of the nuts and bolts is go in and listen, do a listening tour.
Yep.
Go in and really do an assessment of what do the staff members truly know and understand about the mission and the budget and the impact of the organization. What are their perceptions?
Yeah.
What are the things that they see as strengths and opportunities? And then how do you create that trust and that collaboration right out of the gate? Most staff members don't like it when a new leader comes in and it's like, my way or the highway, I'm the new leader, this is what we're going to do. they end up hating them,
Yeah.
or leaving the organization, and it does a lot of damage. So when we look at, managing this the dual bottom line is really looking at, okay, what do I need to know, and then how do I lead through it?
Lead through it. That is key to a nonprofit leader, because this is a group thing. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode, collaborative leadership in particular. But I think everything we do as nonprofit leaders, we have to keep in mind that this is a team sport. This is a committee. Everything we do is almost everything we do is done by committee. And one of the things to look for when you're doing that listening tour, and this is a red flag that I talk about, your organization's out of balance if your fundraising is fighting or in competition with your program. And for some people, that's in themselves, because some people have really small nonprofits. And so they're doing the fundraising and the programming. Sometimes in a bigger nonprofit, I've literally seen the fundraising staff and the program staff yelling at each other because the fundraising staff didn't feel like they could raise money for what the program staff wanted to do, or the program staff didn't want to do what the fundraising staff was raising money for, so they weren't on the same page. They were terribly out of balance. That translates into the next balancing act, which is the multiple customers that you have. So all of this that we're talking about with this double bottom line is internal. And how do you make sure that everybody is kind of on the same page internally with both of your bottom lines, your finance and your mission? But then how do you communicate that out? And the first thing is identifying your customers. Sometimes in the nonprofit sector, we have donors who give us money and don't get anything in return. We have people who receive our services or our products and don't pay for them or don't pay the market rate for them. And then we do have more traditional customers sometimes that are making decisions with their money about, is this a value to me? So they're buying a t-shirt with our logo on it. They're buying a ticket to an event. They're purchasing a workshop or a class that we're giving. We have to kind of have the idea of who are these people in these different categories and how are we communicating to them our mission, our services, and it might be different to a donor than to somebody who you want to come to your programs or use your services. And that can be another external way that we're doing a balancing act.
From my perspective, in doing this work, I think we have to take it back to positive psychology again. I think that there are so many assumptions that people make when they think they know who their target audience is or who their customer is. One of the greatest resources that I've ever learned about, and you and I use this when we talk with clients, is the appreciative inquiry method. Yeah. And appreciative inquiry encourages people to look at things from a different perspective. Is that when we go into some of these surveys and these external conversations, we have bias. And so that bias gets in our way of truly understanding what people need or what they perceive they need. And so the appreciative inquiry method is more conversational, it's more discussional. And so being able to utilize something like that is truly going to help an organization and a leader understand what needs to happen.
Yeah. Getting that input, identifying who your customers are and what are the messages that you might not understand what those messages need to be. I mean, I think the red flag here is exactly the example I gave in the previous episode was I came in to work for an organization and it was, I know your organization, but what do you do? I don't really know what you do. So having those conversations and saying, what do you think we do? Can help you figure out what that messaging needs to be out there into the world and helping to bring in more of whatever client is that you need to bring in.
My nonprofit experience has been in the human services and healthcare space. And so I always found it interesting going into these organizations where they would just tell me, Stephanie, we help people. I'm like, how? Is it preventative? Is it reactionary? What's happening? And what's the message that we send out to the public? What are the things that I need to know and understand to be able to do my job well? And what we see and around employee engagement and keeping people in these nonprofits is people need to be connected to that purpose, understanding what their impact is to their client, their customer. If they don't feel like they have that connection, they have a tendency to not be as engaged in the work environment than those that do feel that connection.
Yeah, I think that's especially true in the nonprofit sector. And if the leadership doesn't know, if the board and the senior leadership doesn't have this balancing act in balance, you're going to see it internally as well with staff who don't really understand the other departments. Like, and going back to program versus fundraising, if the program staff doesn't really understand what the fundraising staff goes through to get the money in to do the work, there has to be that appreciation for that, and the other way around. Fundraising staff can be like, let's go, we're going to raise money, make it rain, and that's great. You need to do that. But the unique part of this for nonprofit leaders is it doesn't always cross. They are often two silos. If you're running a coffee shop, if you're running a business like ours, any kind of business, those two things cross. The people who have the money are making a decision. And if you're not speaking to them, they're not going to give you their money. So in the nonprofit sector, there's kind of this siloed communication out that you have to figure out. Who am I speaking to? When? How? It can be very complicated.
One of the things that you said sparked that in this part of the Unique Balancing Act, I think, is also about the board. And there are some specific things that you and I have seen where people are recruited onto a board, and it may just be, hey, we need a butt in the seat, or, you work at a bank, so therefore you're going to come in and provide the financial perspective. We know that typically does not work really well, or it takes a long time to figure it out. And I remember one of the first engagements that we did with one of the larger nonprofits here in the area is we did a board retreat, and the ED actually took the board around the facility and told them stories and told them about the mission, the focus. And the board members that started in the beginning of that really had a very limited understanding of what the mission was. And when they came back, it became strategic.
Yeah.
They understood, here's the money, here's the governance of what we're doing. But now I understand and I know what the impact is to our client. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were also talking about that it's not just with the staff, but this board piece and board recruitment, they have to understand this Unique Balancing Act as well.
There were board members with that client that you were talking about that had been there for years and had never been through that facility.
I know.
And had never really seen. So there's no wonder that they were really stuck on the one side, on the money, looking at the money and not really getting passionate about the mission of the organization. And the other thing that this isn't really the topic of this, but I'm just going to add this episode. If they're not passionate about the mission, they're not going to be effective board members. They're not going to be effective fundraisers. They're not going to be effective ambassadors. All the things that you want them to be out in the world outside of the boardroom is not going to happen.
They have to have their why.
Yeah. They have to have balance the whole way through from your new hire to your board member that's been around for 20 years. They all have to have that balance.
So today we've talked about the double bottom line. And the importance of being able to understand both what happens internally and externally within the organization, and the complexity of you need to manage it with your staff, but also with the public and with your board.
I think just having an awareness of this, having an awareness that this is something everybody needs to be paying attention to every day. That's one of the answers. Looking for the red flags. Are you having people, staff, board, volunteers that are disagreeing about a priority? And does it come down to this? Does it come down to money versus mission? Things to look for, just be noticing how people are talking and how they're relating to each other. And sometimes in your own head, we talk about mission creep. If you're going after a grant that's not quite what you do, this is out of balance. And you need to get in there and have those conversations and get it fixed, as we say in this area of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all of the nonprofit leaders out there, this can sometimes feel like a really lonely process, and Nonprofit SideKick is here to help. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you need more information or would like to work with us, check out our website at nonprofit.sidekick.com.